we've done an enormous amount of damage to ourselves. I don't see any evidence that anything we do at this point against Iran is going to be good for the United States, the American people, and our long-term strategic interests. But I don't think there is any long-term strategy. I don't think we've ever had a long-term strategy. The only one we can point to in recent years is obviously containment within the last several decades, and that's gone by the wayside. So this is a very short-sighted operation with very short-term interests, the interest to annihilate Iran, make them surrender, if you will, to Donald Trump. Good luck. Don't think
okay, so let me ask you a hard question here. Again, if Iran does take the initiative here, and if they start a sequence that spawns a response by the United States kinetic, and then that they take that as a I guess taking the gloves off, and they hit all those targets you mentioned, which is going to, I don't think it can have any effect other than having a catastrophic economic impact, major recession, possibly depression on the United States, which is going to cause us a great deal of problems throughout the world. What is the possibility or the implications, maybe even better way to put it, for Iran to calculate, hey, listen, we can start a next round here that will definitely have a response, and they'll hit our oil infrastructure, they'll hit our energy, and it'll be very, very painful and a long time to fix. But that could ultimately cause the defeat of the United States, and our long-term objectives may be met. Is that a calculation that they could rationally choose?
I think it is. And I think that you're talking about damage done to the Persian Gulf region and its infrastructure that would require at least 10 years to recover. So you're talking about a definite global level depression, and I think we're well on our way in that direction at this point as well. One of the things that's kind of interesting is to watch Scott Bessent, and he's very sensitive to the bond market. We're now way over 5% in the 30-year bonds. This last bond sale was enormously expensive for us. We're in a lot of trouble financially, and Scott Bessent is using every conceivable trick and illusion that he has in his bag to sort of postpone the inevitable financial collapse that I think is coming. I've always looked at, because I have great confidence and trust in what Jeffrey Goodluck and Luke Rowan and others talk about. I also look at this 5% barrier on the 10-year bond, and everybody makes it very clear if you break that and you go over 5% yield on the 10-year bond, you're in uncharted territory, and that could be catastrophic for us.
You see, we're getting close to that now.
Yeah, this is the end of the petrodollar system, which is, I think, frankly, at this stage, dead anyway, which just recycled dollars from the Persian Gulf back into the United States. That's gone. You don't find anybody wants to invest in our debt. We sort of postponed a collapse in Japan, but doing so harmed the euro because we used the euro, of course, as a banker said to me the other day in Europe. He said, "Who are we kidding? The euro and the dollar are the same thing. It's all dollars." I said, "Oh, okay." I think we're in a very fragile set of conditions right now financially.
So let me ask you this: I
guess I don't know which one breaks first, Dan. Does it break here at home financially first, or does it blow up in the Gulf and then break here financially? I don't know.
Yeah, but it's just a matter of maybe the sequence, not whether. In the event that happens, let's just kind of put this in the context of the world that we're heading into. So by all accounts, there's going to be a bloodbath come November. We're now less than 90 days out to that. And the likelihood is that the next Congress that seats on January 3rd of next year is going to be overwhelmingly Democratic. It's possible even the Senate could go blue as well. I've heard from some folks here in Washington that claim to have some knowledge that the Democrats already have a cohorted plan that they're just going to do investigation after investigation, probably impeachment series, whatever, to completely hamstring President Trump and the Democrat or the Republicans through the next 2 years heading into 2028. That's apparently their plan. So when you have this political dysfunction, which is going to just keep President Trump on the defensive the whole time, at the same time that we have, if this goes back into kinetic and we have a severe economic strain on us, what concerns do you have about the viability and the stability of the United States domestically?
It cost the Jewish Zionist power structure in the United States an estimated $37 million to expel Thomas Massie from office. Now, what will it cost them to retain control of enough of the House and the Senate to prevent Donald Trump's removal from office? I don't know. But if it costs $37 million to expel just one member, and they have a lot of money. I mean, there are pots of money that they have been accumulating out there, and I'm talking about this Zionist Jewish power structure involving hundreds of millions of dollars. It could be applied with the goal of preventing Donald Trump from being removed so that they can retain control of the United States government. Now, they've already got it at this point because we know that 80% of the House and the Senate is effectively paid by the lobby to do what it wants. So that's a fact. You just run through, look at the amounts of money that go in there. And it's amazing. Sometimes it's a lot of money and sometimes it's not that much. But members are so greedy for money and so desperate for money to stay in office that they'll do almost anything to keep it. So I guess my assumption is that this election is probably not going to go well for Trump in particular. But the real issue is, what about this lobby? Can it retain control? That, I think it has a shot at doing so. I wouldn't write it off yet. Now, of course, that could change if the financial system crashes between now and November, and that's not an impossibility. I mean, if you listen to Ray Dalio and others, they'll say it could very easily happen. So I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. Can't know with precision when this sort of thing happens, but that could. Now, when you talk about domestic tranquility, remember we have over 50 million people inside the United States right now who are not born here. How many of those are illegal? How many of those are legal? I don't know what the exact breakdown is, but normally the numbers that you get from the federal government, depending on the administration, are lies. They're not true. So I think we have tens of millions of illegals in the country. What will most of them do? And I think it depends. It also depends on people that hold U.S. citizenship, but frankly, they're only nominally Americans. I mean, they sort of sit there and say, I'm an American. Okay. What makes you American? Well, I have citizenship. Well, popcorn, candy, citizenship, take your pick. It's not that difficult to acquire, frankly. Not for anybody with any kind of money or influence. It's tougher for somebody without any. And a lot of people have worked very hard to get that citizenship, which is one of the reasons they're angry about illegal immigration. But my point is, we don't know how lots of groups will, react. Some groups can go back to where they came from, at least until things here calm down. Other groups have nothing to go back to. And then you have the question of the rule of law. Where do we stand on that right now? How many police or policemen have left the service because they're afraid to do their jobs? They're afraid that if they do their jobs, they'll end up in front of a judge, and this judge is going to castigate them and ultimately crucify them and put them in jail when what they did was their job. How do you fix these things? Remember, if we go back to 2016, these are the things that Donald Trump was elected to do. It didn't work out very well for him because he didn't know what he was doing during his first term. Then there was the hope that if he got a second term, or in this case, the term that comes after Biden, that he may have learned something and got something right. And we discovered this time around, he's not even in control. He doesn't govern. It's the lobby that governs. So what could happen? I think everything from outright social disintegration, societal disintegration into chaos, to mild unrest in all of the nation's big cities, because it's in the cities that are concentrated two kinds of people: very high end income people, not very many, but a lot. And then at the other end, large numbers of people who have nothing. And if they can't get what they need to survive and they already have nothing, they tend to be reckless. So I can't go into any greater detail, but I think we have to accept the fact that none of this is good news. And it makes you wonder just how completely out of touch everybody in Washington is. And every time I visit the place and I talk to people, I think they're living in somewhere along the line of the 1960s or the late 80s, early 90s. They're not living in the world that is America today.
Yeah, that's one of the things I worry about that very thing, because it's unknown, but it's almost certainly going to be bad if we go down this path, which we seem to be heading down. And the amount of time I have left with you, I want to shift gears over to the Russia-Ukraine war, because there's some continuing developments that are going on over there, which is not good for the Ukraine side. But I think we talked last time you were on that Ukraine has now effectively run out of interceptor missiles, even if they weren't that effective. Even when they're all functioning. Now they don't even have them to function at all, which means the skies are just wide open to whatever Russia wants to do. But as you were talking about before we went on the air here, there's also Another development on the Russian side, which could have some impact on what could come next. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about this comment that Gerasimov, their chief of their general staff, is coming to the end of his, I think, an extended term that he had already. According to Russian law, he's not going to be able to. Might they replace him with somebody who had a different mindset?
Well, before we leave completely the war zone, we need to understand that very recently the Ukrainians successfully launched an estimated 800 unmanned systems, drones, that had been supplied by the British. The British incorporated new engines that gave them greater range, also a little bit more speed, making them harder to shoot down. So you're talking about essentially cruise missiles that fly about 20 feet above the treetops. They fly very fast. They came in great numbers. They struck targets in Moscow as well as Volgograd. I've forgotten the third city, but the point is they did a lot of damage. Now, is this damage going to stop Russia in its tracks? No. Is it going to make life harder for the average Russian? Not really. But it was a very disturbing event because you're talking about large numbers of these weapons penetrating air defenses simply because the radars couldn't pick them up. And when they did pick them up, it was too late. They had already passed. But remember, these things came largely from Great Britain. And this goes back to the other issue that we discussed a few weeks ago, which is how much longer do the Russians wait before they take action directly against the British and other states in NATO that are actively supplying this stuff to the Ukrainians. Remember, this is not going to change the outcome of the war. Ukraine is losing. It's going to continue to lose. It'll be devastated. In fact, more and more of us looking at this, and the few people left in Ukraine, less than half of what were there at the beginning, wonder if there will even be a Ukraine on the map. That's another subject, but I think we have to take that into consideration. On the ground, we see dramatic advances towards Zaporizhia. We see the bridge at Zaporizhia, which is, I'm told, still structurally sound, but has been at least partially destroyed. Not that it makes a great deal of difference, because if anybody can throw bridges across the Dnieper River quickly and effectively, it's the Russians. And I think they can do that. So I don't think they're all that dependent on that bridge, though it's a very nice bridge and can hold a lot of weight. But I think what we're seeing is that the movement towards Odessa is very real, and it's begun. Odessa has been cut off. It's blockaded from the sea. It is no longer the artery of support and sustainment for the Ukrainians. And the Russians have actually sent in Spetsnaz and come out with lots of prisoners, some of whom I'm told are NATO officers. We don't admit to any of that, and we will not confirm any of that, but I think that's going on. So my perception is we're at the beginning of the end for Odessa, and we're seeing dramatic movement in the south. I know that the Russians are on the outskirts of Kharkov. When they plan to pull the string on that is anybody's guess. And then again, you now have, someone told me, as many as 20,000 or more North Korean troops up in Belarusia, north of Korea, along with 90 to 100,000 other Russian and Belarusian troops. Those could be hurled on very short notice south in the direction of Kiev. So the reason I bring all that up is that one thing is very clear. The Russians have at their disposal all the weapons, all the capabilities, and I would argue all the troops they need to end this war. Now, they have worried and continue to worry about a war with Europe. I mean, if you go over there, everybody I talk to who comes back from Russia says the same thing. Everybody there thinks that they have to be ready for a war with Europe and NATO. They do not see us as part of that. There's still this perception that the Americans are not going to be part of that. We're just dealing with a European threat. Well, Dan, if that's true, there's no threat. And that's what everybody keeps trying to tell them. Maybe President Putin is realizing this finally, that the threat that he was worried about is not really there militarily. And then, of course, you have the Merz government, which is on life support. It's clinging to power with its fingernails. Macron is in equally bad shape, and the situation in Great Britain is more than just explosive. And if you can get David Betts to come on and talk to you about the conditions inside Great Britain for civil unrest and open rebellion, please bring him on, because his work is arguably some of the best I've seen anywhere on the general question of what do societies do. And everyone in that part of the world has had enough with millions of young men from the North Africa and the Middle East pouring into the country, raping, pillaging, committing crimes. It's unacceptable. They want them out. And I think that if you combine that with the economic damage, it's a recipe for destruction. And so maybe that's going to figure that out. Now, to go to your last point, Gerasimov was given a 5-year extension 5 years ago. technically he's 70. He's got to leave. Now, can President Putin say, I don't care, and ask Parliament to pass some legislation that allows him to stay longer? I suppose he could. However, there's a lot of discontent with Gerasimov. Gerasimov is seen as sort of the toad in the road, someone who has obstructed badly needed change in the conduct of operations, someone who has exercised more than just caution, but has been downright timid. There is a lot of support for someone else to take over. Now, there are no rumors, but remember we mentioned Surovikin, who came out of nowhere, out of Africa after several years, had a big meeting with President Putin, and he was decorated, and it was a harmonious love fest. And then Surovikin disappeared. Just nowhere to be found. There are people hoping that he may be the mystery chief of staff that comes out of nowhere, because everybody knows he's far more aggressive and is absolutely determined to end this war as rapidly as possible. Gerasimov has also jailed at least one major general who had the audacity to stand up and contradict him and criticize his conduct of things. And Gerasimov put him in jail, and to Putin's shame, according to many people, Putin has let the man languish there. That may change. I don't know. Russia is a place where, and I think it's Jim Jatras that you've had on your show, he says to me all the time, Russia is a place where what you expect doesn't ever happen. And what you never expect, it does. So that should set us all up for failure as prophets.
Right. Well, let's look at one of the other things you said a second ago, because it's very much related to what could be coming next. And this is this presumption, which I've also heard from a number of Russian sources, that they believe that if there is an Article 5 initiation because Russia strikes somewhere in Germany and UK, et cetera, that the U.S. will not come in, that they will talk, that they'll maybe help out some way with arms or ammunition, but that we will not go and fight Russia for Europe, because that line gets crossed in there. Is the United States, let's see if it's not just a political decision, but I mean, in light of where we are now, I mean, we're talking about the problems that we're having with our entire Navy, which you talked about at the earlier part of the show, when you're talking about the ammunition supplies and the limitations on the long range missiles and the defensive missiles that we already have. And we can't fix that with our defense industrial base anytime in the next 5 to 6 years, probably even longer than that. Can we go into a fight with Russia? What if we did? What would happen to the U.S. Armed Forces?
Oh, I think we'd be in a lot of trouble. I mean, as you and I know, for all intents and purposes, we had no army. The army is a shadow of its former self. There is no depth in it at all. As for its state of training and capability, I wouldn't want to guess. I hear very mixed reports from the people that are inside. So I just don't know. But when you look at 450,000 men, you get about 125 to 130,000 that can actually fight and deploy to fight. Then when you begin to look at the support structures that are required, much of that has to be mobilized and transported to the theater. In this case, it would be Eastern Europe, and is in the reserves or the National Guard. I don't think that's going to happen. By the way, President Trump just expressed his anger with South Korea. And because of South Korea's unwillingness to go along with what he wants to do in the Persian Gulf and some other issues, he decided to call off a joint exercise involving the U.S. Armed Forces and the Koreans. Now, some of that's on the ground. Most of it's air and naval, scaled down anyway. Frankly, the South Koreans, particularly this government, would like us off the peninsula as it is. We're not very popular over there anymore. We've grossly overstayed our welcome. And no one believes in this imminent threat from North Korea because the Chinese won't permit it. I don't think the Russians would allow it to happen because the Chinese won't allow it to happen. Remember, when it comes to decisions in Asia, Russia will always defer to Beijing, and Beijing wants nothing to do with a war started by North Korea. So Trump acts on the basis of emotion, on a routine basis, and strikes out in any way, shape, or form that he can. You don't support me. You didn't do anything for me when I wanted you to do something, so the hell with you. I don't think he pays much attention to treaties and alliances and legal obligations. Finally, I still hold that Donald Trump will resist the employment or use of any nuclear weapon. And that's based upon what I saw of him in the past and his statements over the last several years. I don't think he'll buy into the tactical nuclear weapon. Now, I could be wrong. Again, remember, Mr. Netanyahu carries a lot more weight than anybody else. And Netanyahu could prevail upon him to do that. The other thing that's kind of interesting is that Netanyahu and Zelensky are now closer than they've ever been. And that's partially Zelensky, who's always been supportive of Netanyahu, but also his desire to make this the biggest war he can, because that's his only chance in his mind of success and survival. I think that's delusional, but I think that's on his mind. But we have to look at these wars increasingly as merging, as we talked about before. And so when you look at it from that standpoint, Dan, we can't possibly fight two at once. We're barely able to fight one.
And what about even about doctrinally? I mean, obviously, you were arguing since 1997 about how we need to reorganize and reform even how we fight and what we fight with and all that. That would have been great if we had done that now. But here we basically haven't hardly made any changes since your 1997 book. And we're kind of trying to fight, I don't know, World War II or Desert Storm better than we did before, but not much changes, even with all of these things. We've tried to graft on a few more drones here and there, and maybe some more missiles and some other kinds of weaponry, et cetera. But we're not wanting to change anything. Right now, as from some information that I have just recently possessed, only a handful of American tanks, for example, this is just one example, have any of these turtle cages or any of these other kinds of protection. Which means that if we suddenly had to go into an Article 5 type situation and we tried to fight Russia on the land, I mean, we would just literally just get obliterated on the field, because none of our tanks that didn't have that would even have a chance of surviving. That's just one thing. We don't have the offensive drone capability or the defensive drone capability or the rapid transition capability that both the Russians and the Ukraine have. I mean, it sounds to me like we would just get our clocks cleaned if we even attempted it.
Oh, I think that's a certainty. But remember, we have historically relied very heavily on air supremacy. That's another matter that has to be called into question, because what is it, 25 to 30% of all the Reaper drones that fly at 25, 30,000 feet, if necessary, have been shot down and lost over the Gulf. We've also lost aircraft. We haven't lost aircraft in very many conflicts since really the Korean War. So I think it would be catastrophically stupid to do that. But remember something else. When I reorganized the force, I also tied it to an implicit strategy that was based on the British approach before 1914. And the approach that the British had taken before 1914 is that you do not confront continental powers on their terms, because you'll lose, because you're primarily in aerospace, in those times, only maritime power. The old expression is ship's a fool to fight a fort. You know, we can't do that. The British couldn't do it. And they should have learned from the Boer War that trying to move hundreds of thousands of troops over thousands of miles to fight an elusive enemy was a gross waste of time. But they did it. And after it was over, and it cost them enormous amounts of money, put them into debt, they made an alliance with the Japanese. And part of the agreement they made with the Japanese, who would pick up responsibility for British interests in the Pacific, because the British could no longer maintain a Pacific fleet, was that they would provide, that is, the Japanese would provide, in the event of a war with Russia, in India, 100,000 troops to fight shoulder to shoulder with 150,000 British troops to keep the Russians from attacking India. Now, what am I trying to say? In other words, there was some strategic thinking behind British behavior until 1914. In 1914, they did what we've done. They entered a war they didn't have to fight against a country that had never been their enemy, called Germany. No German soldier had fought against a British soldier since before the 7 Years' War. Just earlier than that. There was no reason, but they did. There was no reason for us to precipitate this war with Iran, but we did it. There was no reason to go into Vietnam. How many Vietnamese had paddled their way over in sampans and attacked San Francisco? Not very many. Why did we go back into Iraq? Well, we botched our opportunity in 1991 to remove Saddam and put another bunch in there. But the second time around, we went in because we wanted to change Iraq and make it Israel-friendly. The first democratically elected government in the Arab world that would be friendly to the United States and Israel and so forth. It's all nonsense. We're still involved in nonsense, trying to achieve or attain the unattainable. God forbid that we should try to go into Cuba. We went there 3 times in the early 20th century, and that worked out very badly. We actually wrote their constitution. We supervised elections 3 times, 3 invasions. We got to get out of this business once and for all. And frankly, Trump doesn't think so much in terms of this thing we call the liberal international order, which is a disaster because it's all about nation building and stupidity like that. He thinks in terms of American military hegemony, which is really what it's about and has been for a long time. But our hegemony is too expensive. We don't need it.
Yeah.
The American people don't want it. The world doesn't want it. It's unnecessary. But the argument is always the same. If we don't do this, the whole world will collapse.
Yeah.
The Russians will overrun. They'll be sitting on the Seine River fishing for dead fish in the Seine. The Chinese will be down somewhere in the neighborhood of Singapore. Well, they're already there as Chinese, we know. But, the Chinese army is going to march back into Southeast Asia. They're going to attack down the peninsula. It's all crap. It needs to go away. We need to get out of this business once and for all. But this may be the straw that finally breaks the camel's back.
Yeah.
This thing called Iran. And I think you're right. And I don't see how he avoids another collision.
And man, you've also been warning for so many years that once we got to this, I'm talking like for the last 20 years that you and I have known each other, especially. You keep saying that one of these days we're going to get into one of these wars. It's going to bankrupt us, and then it's going to cause the loss of empire. And I fear we're right on the cusp of that. And I hope we don't have to prove whether you're right on that one.
Well, we don't need the empire. Never did. We are an empire right here in North America, and that's where we need to focus.